Is taxation theft? It's one of those questions, isn't it? Sparks really strong opinions, feels deeply personal sometimes.
Definitely. For some people, it's just a fundamental violation of their liberty.
Yeah, and for others, it's like, well, it's just the cost of living in society,
Right.
right? Unavoidable.
Exactly.
So on this deep dive, we're going to try and unpack this really complex, kind of provocative question. Our whole mission here is to help you get, truly well-informed, cut through the noise a bit without just drowning you in information. We'll look at the philosophy behind it, trace some of the surprising history, and even dig into some fascinating experimental evidence.
Yeah, we've pulled from quite a range, academic papers, historical stuff, even some, interesting online discussions to give different perspectives.
And just to be clear, our goal is purely to explore. We're not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We just want to lay out the arguments, the findings from the sources as impartially as we can so you can make up your own mind.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's kick things off. Let's dive into that core libertarian claim that taxation is, well, basically theft. Or maybe even forced labor. This is where it gets philosophical.
It really does. And one of the big names here is Robert Nozick. Back in 1974, he famously said, taxation of earnings is on a par with forced labor.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And the moral objection is pretty clear, right? If we all agree forced labor is wrong, inherently wrong.
Which most people do.
Exactly. Then, by that logic, Nozick argues taxation must also be wrong.
On a par with forced labor. That's a really stark way to put it. But, for people listening, that might sound a bit abstract. How do those thought experiments help make this idea of forcing and value seizure feel more tangible?
That's a great question. So think about the violinist case. It's a modified version of a scenario by Judith Jarvis Thompson.
Okay.
Imagine you wake up and you find you've been forcibly hooked up to this unconscious, famous violinist.
Right.
Your kidneys are filtering his blood. If you disconnect, he dies. The argument here is that the wrongness, the moral wrongness, comes from the forcing.
The lack of consent.
Precisely. And the loss of value to you, your time, your bodily autonomy, maybe just your plans for that day. You're being compelled to help someone else.
Okay, I see the parallel.
And then you can extend that to something like the island case. You've got Crusoe and Friday. If Crusoe is forced to work extra hours just so his produce can be seized to support Friday, well, if Crusoe is compelled to work longer for Friday's benefit, many people would say that's immoral.
It feels wrong.
It does. And interestingly, that feeling often gets stronger in variations like the culpable violinist, where the person needing help, the violinist or Friday, is seen as somehow responsible for their own situation.
Ah, okay, so the perceived injustice feels even greater then.
Exactly. Makes the forced contribution feel even less fair.
And this whole idea, this thread of coercion, lack of consent, it pops up with historical libertarian figures too, right? Like Lysander Spooner.
Absolutely. Spooner, back in the 19th century, argued that this whole idea of a social contract just doesn't justify taxation.
Why not?
Because, he said, the government uses force against people who haven't actually consented. There's no real signed contract that every single citizen agreed to. It's not like you personally signed on the dotted line.
Right, you're just born into it.
Pretty much. And then you have Murray Rothbard. In The Ethics of Liberty, he draws this direct line between a tax collector and a robber.
That's blunt.
It is. He asks, look, are you morally required to tell a robber the truth about where your valuables are?
Probably not.
Right. So why, Rothbard asks, should you be morally required to tell the state everything on your tax return? He's implying the state doesn't have that legitimate authority either.
Interesting. And what about L.K. Samuels and the ruler's paradox?
Yeah, that's another angle. Samuels suggests that governments can logically only exercise rights that citizens themselves have.
Meaning?
Well, you or I can't legally just take someone's property, right? Or imprison them or wiretap them without cause.
No, of course not.
So the paradox is, how can the government legitimately do things like tax, which some see as seizure, if the individuals it represents don't possess that right themselves?
Okay, so that lays out the libertarian challenge pretty clearly. But naturally, there are strong counterarguments. What happens when we flip this perspective?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because other philosophical views push back hard. One big one is social constructivism, especially regarding property rights and income. Ki-Han Chen talks about this.
Social constructivism, so not inherent rights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It challenges that sort of Locke idea, that property rights are fundamental, natural, existing before government.
Okay.
Instead, this view argues that property rights aren't inherent at all. They're created and defined by our social structures, by our laws. And those structures and laws, they can change. They're dynamic.
Ah, so if property rights aren't fixed, but something we kind of collectively agree on, society can adjust the rules, including taxes.
Precisely. From this viewpoint, things like social and economic inequalities might be acceptable, but only if there is, say, equal opportunity, and if those inequalities ultimately work to benefit the least advantaged.
Right.
So taxation isn't seen as theft in this model. It's more like a tool, a moral and valuable tool for redistribution, for societal development. It shifts the frame from "it's my money, hands off" to "my money exists because of this social framework we've all built."
That's a fundamental shift in thinking.
It really is. And it leads nicely into the benefit argument.
Ah, yes, the idea that taxes are basically payment for services.
You often hear it put as, taxes are the price for living in a modern economy, or even the cost of civilization.
And Nathan J. Robinson makes a strong point that pre-tax income doesn't really mean much without a government, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. How much do we rely on government structures just to create wealth in the first place?
Like courts.
Courts to enforce contracts and property rights, sure. But also the government issuing money, building roads, sewers, streetlights, basic infrastructure, even things that seem purely business-focused, like limited liability for corporations. That's a legal structure created by the state.
So the argument is that the wealth itself is partly a product of the system taxes support.
In a very real sense, yes. And Adam D. Moore's spaceship thought experiment adds a really interesting nuance here.
The spaceship.
Yeah. He argues that while forcing someone to provide for other people's needs might be wrong.
Like the violinist case.
Right. But forcing someone to contribute to their own necessities, say, everyone on a spaceship having to chip in to fix holes in the hull so they can all breathe, that can be morally okay.
Ah. So the key question becomes, what counts as a shared necessity?
Exactly. Is clean air a necessity? Is a functioning legal system? A road network? It shifts the debate from just forcing is bad to what are we being forced to contribute to?
Okay. And that brings us to the whole democratic choice angle and the social contract idea again. You hear the love it or leave it argument a lot.
You do. If you don't like paying taxes, just leave.
But the sources push back on that, don't they?
They do. They argue that actually disengaging from modern society to avoid taxes, like trying to live entirely by barter or avoiding all property taxes, is often legally impossible, or at least incredibly difficult.
So the choice to leave isn't really a practical choice for most people?
Not really, given how pervasive state structures are. It's not as simple as just opting out.
And while someone like Moore might say even a unanimous vote doesn't justify forcing someone, like hooking them to the violinist,
Right.
others argue that democracy makes a difference. The fact that you get to vote on tax policy, participate in the system, that supposedly differentiates it from just straightforward theft or slavery.
Yeah, the element of agency of having some say is seen as crucial by that side of the argument.
Okay, so we've got this philosophical back and forth, strong points on both sides. But what happens when you take this out of the realm of pure thought experiments and actually, test it?
Sure.
What does the evidence show about how people behave with public goods?
Oh, well, that's where things get really practical and honestly quite revealing. There's this landmark experimental study from the Cowles Foundation, Huber, Schubick, and Sunder.
Okay, what do they do?
They set up a lab economy. Participants had private goods they could invest in production, but they also had to deal with a shared public facility. Think of it like a road or transport system that would decay if people didn't contribute to its upkeep.
And they compare different ways of funding it.
Exactly. The key comparison was between voluntary anonymous contributions, just letting people chip in if they felt like it anonymously,
Right.
versus funding it through taxation.
Okay, so if the philosophical taxation is theft argument holds weight, you might expect people to resist the taxation part.
You might think so, but the results were, well, pretty striking. Under the voluntary contribution system, what happened?
Let me guess, people didn't contribute much.
Bingo. A rapid decline in the public goods provision. It often fell to just 5 to 20% of what would have been the optimal level for the group.
Wow, that low.
Yeah. It's basically the classic free rider problem, playing out in real time. People hope others will pay for it.
Okay, so what happened under taxation?
Complete contrast. When the public good was financed through taxes, the lab economies managed to sustain it at much higher levels, somewhere between the finite and infinite horizon optima, meaning it worked much, much better. The shared resource was maintained effectively, closer to the theoretical best-case scenario for everyone, whether they knew the game had an end or not.
That's a huge difference.
It is. But here's the kicker, maybe the most fascinating part.
Go on.
When they actually gave the participants a choice between the two systems, voluntary or taxation, guess what happened?
Based on the results, I'm guessing they chose taxation.
Overwhelmingly, a 23 out of 24 majority votes favored taxation.
Seriously, 23 out of 24.
Yep, almost unanimous. It suggests that when people actually experience the results, they see the practical benefit of taxation for maintaining public goods, regardless of the philosophical angle.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It really does. And there's more. They found that overall efficiency, like how much payoff people got and how much private stuff they produced, was actually higher when the taxes were set by a vote within the group rather than just being fixed externally by the experimenters.
So having a say in the tax rate motivated them.
It seems so. It suggests that democratic input matters. And interestingly, the taxes they voted for tended to stay at a kind of intermediate level. They didn't vote for zero taxes, but they didn't vote for 100% taxes either. They found a balance.
So the experiment really shifts the focus from just right versus wrong to what actually enables a society to function.
I think that's a fair way to put it. It brings a very practical dimension to the whole debate.
Okay, and to really get the full picture here, it's probably helpful to look back, right? I mean, taxation isn't exactly a new idea.
Not even close. It's practically as old as civilization itself. Understanding that history kind of adds another layer to this whole discussion.
So how far back are we talking?
Well, the Tax Foundation points to ancient Egypt around 3000 BCE as having the earliest known records.
3000 BCE. What were they taxing?
Livestock, apparently. The pharaoh would collect it, often paid in grain, during this event called the Shamsu Ho, which was like a royal tour and census.
Wow.
And even in ancient Sumer, you had cuneiform tablets recording taxes owed to the temples. So it was tied into community, maybe even religion, right from the start.
And isn't the Rosetta Stone connected to taxes somehow?
It is, which is amazing when you think about it. The key to unlocking hieroglyphics was partly a tax document from 196 BCE, outlining new tax laws from Ptolemy V.
That's incredible. Shows how central it was.
Absolutely. And you see familiar types of taxes appearing really early on, too.
Like what?
Well, ancient Rome had a 1% sales tax under Augustus the Centesima Rerum Venalium, 1/100th of things sold.
A sales tax.
Oh.
Okay.
Ancient China, around 9 BCE, might have had the first income tax 10% on net farm income under Emperor Wang Mang. Babylon had early forms of property tax based on land yield. And tariffs taxes on trade go way back, like 3000, 2000 BCE, between cities trading metals and textiles.
So income tax, property tax, sales tax, tariffs, they've all got ancient roots.
Pretty much. They evolved based on what societies valued and what they could actually track and collect at the time.
Okay, bringing it closer to our time, American history is just steeped in tax debates, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Taxation without representation, that wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a core reason for the revolution.
Right. Things like the Sugar Act.
Sugar Act of 1764, Stamp Act of 1765, Townshend Acts in 67, the Tea Act in 73. These were all flashpoints. It wasn't just about the money, it was about that principle of consent or lack thereof. Echoes Spooner's argument, really.
The legitimacy question again?
Exactly. And then after the revolution, the Constitution itself, Article 1, Section 8, explicitly gave Congress the power to lay and collect taxes. A huge shift.
But it wasn't always income tax driving revenue, was it?
No, not for a long time. Tariffs were the main source of cash for the U.S. government right up until the early 20th century.
Really?
Yeah. There was an income tax during the Civil War, the Revenue Act of 1862, but it got repealed later on. Shows how tax systems respond to crises and changing needs.
So when did the modern income tax come in?
The big moment was 1913 with the 16th Amendment. That reestablished the federal income tax, and, well, now it's the biggest single source of government revenue.
And other taxes followed.
Yep, you got the estate tax in 1916, the gift tax in 1924, and then Social Security payroll taxes started in 1937. Each one reflects sort of evolving ideas about society and the government's role.
Okay. So we've covered the philosophy, the experiments, the history. Quite a journey. How do we tie all these threads together for the big question? Is taxation theft?
Well, if you step back and look at the whole picture, you see the theft argument really comes down to a belief in absolute individual rights, property rights, self-ownership. From that view, any forced taking just feels fundamentally wrong. It's rooted in that idea of pre-existing natural rights.
Right, the Lockean perspective.
Exactly. But the counter-argument flips that, framing property rights as social constructs. It says, look, income doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within a societal framework.
The framework that taxes help maintain.
Precisely. So society has a legitimate claim to some of that income to fund the collective benefits, the courts, roads, safety nets that make wealth creation possible in the first place.
And it feels like that experimental evidence really bridges these two views in a practical way.
I think it does. That Cowles Foundation study is pretty compelling. It shows that whatever the philosophy, when people are faced with the practical choice, they tend to choose taxation over voluntary contributions.
Because it just works better for providing those public goods. Leads to better outcomes, more efficiency, more productivity, as the study showed.
Right. So it suggests that even if you feel taxation is a form of taking, and let's be honest, it is taking resources, the question shifts. It becomes less about if it's taking and more about whether that taking is justified.
Justified by the benefits, by the democratic process, by the sheer practical need to fund things everyone relies on.
Exactly. It's not just what's taken, it's what's provided in return, and crucially, how that whole system is set up and agreed upon, ideally democratically.
So this deep dive really hammers home that it's way more nuanced than a simple yes or no answer.
Definitely not black and white.
It really pushes you to think not just about your individual rights, but also about how we function together in this incredibly complex, interconnected society.
Yeah, and it leaves us with a pretty fundamental question, doesn't it? If we were to prioritize absolute individual liberty and property rights above everything else, are we okay with the potential consequence? A world where essential public goods, roads, clean air, maybe even basic safety nets might just wither away because voluntary contributions aren't enough. The experiments suggest that's a real risk.
Or is the other side the reality we accept? That making a democratic choice to fund services collectively through taxation, even with that element of forcing, is actually a necessary, maybe even fundamental part of living in the modern world we've built. What really stands out to you after hearing all this?
It's a tough balance.
It absolutely is. And this tension, between individual freedom and collective responsibility, it seems like it's going to keep shaping these debates about taxes for a long time to come.
It's a balancing act societies have been trying to figure out for literally thousands of years.
And the journey definitely continues.